Welcome to this video, where we dive into the life of one of the most dangerous serial killers in modern history, Johann Jack Unterweger. We will recount his life story from childhood, through imprisonment, release, and then his return to committing a series of horrific murders in Austria, the Czech Republic, and the United States, with detailed accounts of each victim, the investigation process, and cross-continental police cooperation. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new content. Your support motivates us to do more. Childhood and adolescence. Johann Unterweger was born on August 16, 1950, in Judenburg, Austria. He grew up in a troubled environment as his mother abandoned him shortly after birth, and he was raised by his grandfather. During adolescence, he entered a recurring cycle of thefts and assaults, including petty crimes and sexual assaults, forming a progressive pattern of violence. In mid-1974, he met a young woman named Barbara Schultes, and they became romantically involved. Together, they planned a burglary at her parents' house as a way to make quick money. We will recount his life story from childhood, through imprisonment, release, and then his return to committing a series of horrific murders in Austria, the Czech Republic, and the United States. With detailed accounts of each victim, the investigation process, and cross-continental police cooperation. Welcome to this video, where we dive into the life of Johann Jack Unterweger. Stay with us as we uncover how his past shaped his crimes. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our new content. Your support motivates us to do more. My. Some people are just born bad. Johann Unterweger was one of them. Back in 1974, he was a small-time crook with big-time ambitions, and not the good kind. He and his girlfriend, a young woman named Barbara, decided they needed some quick cash. Their plan was simple, or so they thought. They would drive to the small town of Uersbach in Germany, find a house that looked ripe for the picking, and help themselves to whatever they could find. It's a story I've heard 1,000 times. Greed leads to bad decisions, and bad decisions often lead to a body. This was no different. They didn't pick a house at random. No, these two had a target. They had their eyes set on a place where they thought the occupants would be out. It was a calculated risk, but their calculations were dead wrong. To him, people were just obstacles. He and Barbara broke in, their minds set on jewelry, cash, anything of value. They were intruders, violating the sanctity of a family's home. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the hallway, was a step closer to a point of no return. Margaret Schaefer was the woman of the house. She was home that day. She wasn't supposed to be there, not according to their half-baked plan. When she walked in on them, the simple robbery they had planned spiraled out of control in an instant. It was about a witness, and for a man like Johann Unterweger, there was only one way to deal with a witness. Margaret Schaefer was just 18 years old. When she came home and found Unterweger and Barbara in her house, panic set in. They drove her to a secluded wooded area. The true monster inside Johann Unterweger was unleashed. He beat Margaret Schaefer mercilessly. This was a calculated, brutal execution. After she was dead, or close to it, he did something else. Something that would become his calling card, his bloody signature. He took off her bra and used it to strangle her, tying it in a complex, specific knot. This wasn't a random act of savagery. This was a ritual. After the murder, they left her body in the woods, covered with leaves. The brutality and the specific method left a permanent mark, a puzzle piece investigators would one day fit into a much larger, horrifying picture. Unterweger was arrested, tried, convicted, and in 1976 sentenced to life in prison. Behind the cold stone walls of Stein Prison, Unterweger discovered a new weapon, the written word. He wrote poems, short stories, plays, and an autobiography titled Fegefeuer oder die Reise ins Zuchthaus. His writing was raw, powerful, and convincing, enough to seduce Austria's intellectual elite. They championed his cause, petitioning for his release. In 1990, the prison gates opened, and a monster walked out, disguised as a literary star. He was a celebrity, dapper, charming, always in a sharp white suit, driving a flashy Ford Mustang. He discussed his redemption and the flaws of the justice system. He was hired as a journalist and as a radio host. He attended police briefings and went on ride-alongs, learning methods from the inside while wearing a public mask. That mask gave him access and cover. The public saw a reformed intellectual while he quietly slipped back into old, violent habits. Soon after his release, sex workers started disappearing from Vienna. Bodies turned up in wooded areas. They had been beaten and strangled with their own bras tied in a complex identical knot. He reported on the murders, offering expert psychology, playing a twisted game, hiding in plain sight. Hired to cover Los Angeles, he brought his gruesome ritual to America. Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, Peggy Booth, beaten and strangled with that same distinctive knot. Investigators connected the signature across 2 continents. In 1994, he was found guilty and sentenced to life with no parole. The beginning of suspicion and investigation. Police began suspecting Unterweger after analyzing patterns in the murders, especially the strangulation method using clothing and the distinctive knot found on all victims. Key details about the initial suspicions. Investigators in Vienna and Graz noticed that the timing of the murders coincided with Unterweger's official and media appearances. He was seen in cafes and public places shortly before and during the crimes. Police records confirmed his repeated travel to Prague and Los Angeles around the same dates as the murders, raising international suspicion and linking Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the United States. Handwritten notes and small diaries found in a Vienna cafe contain names and data about victims' locations, giving police their first tangible clue of his involvement. Suspicion grew further when cross-checking interviews he had conducted. Some victims had met him shortly before their deaths. Austrian police worked with U.S. authorities to analyze passport records, airline tickets, and travel routes, mapping his movements to crime locations and creating a unified case file. Investigators analyzed the strangulation patterns and disposal of the bodies, noting the repeated use of his unique knot across all murders. Witnesses from cafes and public areas described him as polite and intellectual, which initially made it difficult for police to unmask his true nature. All these details formed the foundation of the investigation and ultimately narrowed the circle of suspects until focus fell squarely on Unterweger, who was later arrested in Miami and extradited to Austria for trial. Investigators and prosecution. Main investigators. Police teams from Graz, Vienna, Prague, and Los Angeles. Prosecutor Heimo Lambauer, Austrian public prosecutor. Psychiatrist Reinhard Haller, who assessed Unterweger as having narcissistic personality disorder during trial. Arrest and trial. On February 27, 1992, U.S. authorities located Unterweger in Miami after carefully monitoring travel records, press interviews, and communication data linked to potential victims. Surveillance showed he often traveled across the U.S. and Europe shortly before murders occurred, reinforcing suspicions that his movements matched his manipulation and threats to victims. He was tracked on a flight to Miami and arrested quietly without resistance, after positive identification through photos and evidence supplied by Austrian and Czech police. He was later extradited to Austria with a full dossier containing travel logs, notes, press clippings, and analytical reports about each victim. Details of the trial. The trial began in Vienna in November 1992 before the High Court, attended by a large team of investigators, prosecutors, and psychiatric experts. Prosecutor Heimo Lambauer presented detailed case files for each murder, including eyewitness accounts, travel records, and written notes linking Unterweger to the victims. Psychiatric experts such as Reinhard Haller testified about narcissistic personality disorder and aggressive behavior, highlighting the consistent pattern of control and domination. The prosecution displayed crime scene photos, victim notes, and Unterweger's own writings from cafes and hotels, arguing the murders were deliberate and premeditated. The defense attempted to portray him as rehabilitated during his earlier prison term, citing his literary works and journalistic contributions. But overwhelming physical evidence and testimonies undermined this claim. The trial lasted nearly a full year, with extensive hearings analyzing each murder, from Margaret Schaefer in 1974 to the Los Angeles crimes in 1991. On June 28, 1994, the court found him guilty of 9 additional murders and sentenced him to life imprisonment without parole. The precise death. On June 29, 1994, just 2 days after the verdict, Johann Unterweger was found dead in his cell at Graz-Karlau prison in Austria. The cell was small and dimly lit, with a high barred window unreachable from the inside. Unterweger was discovered hanging, having fashioned a rope from shoelaces and an old tracksuit. The knot he used was the same distinctive style he had employed on his victims. His body was suspended from a metal bar above the bed, with clear ligature marks around his neck. Guards found handwritten notes beside him, containing reflections on his life in prison and symbolic messages apparently directed toward society and the authorities. The investigation confirmed no signs of forced entry or struggle, supporting the suicide conclusion. Time of death was estimated in the early morning hours before the guards' routine rounds. The use of his trademark knot made his death chillingly symbolic, mirroring the very method he used on his victims. His end added a haunting psychological dimension to the story of his life and crimes.